A humorous bug from The Last of Us depicts an NPC achieving a new stage of infection. Throughout the course of the game, players will encounter a variety of opponents who will interact with them in unusual ways. This new stage of infection is one of several anomalies present throughout The Last of Us video games. What effect do they have on the game? Does it make the game more interesting? Let's find out. Let's begin with an overview of the subject. A very long time ago in 2013, The Last of Us was released all over the world, physically and digitally. The game has received several awards for Game of the Year and currently has a 95 out of 100 on Metacritic, indicating that it was a commercial and critical success. Over 20 million copies of the game were eventually sold, and a remake of The Last of Us Part 1 was recently made available for the PlayStation 5 platform. However, to this day, players still report strange bugs within the game. Ever since both editions of the game were made available to the public, players have reported finding a wide variety of weird bugs dispersed throughout the game's primary storyline. For instance, a bug in The Last of Us gave the impression that Vecna from Stranger Things was capturing one of the non-playable characters in the game. Reddit user Thermal Flask posted a new glitch not too long ago that showed an enemy NPC flying through the air. He joked that it was a new stage of infection in the game. Moving on, what stage of infection is this? In video games, the progression of infection typically occurs throughout 4 stages. In the video games based on the book The Last of Us, each succeeding stage of the infection presents a greater challenge than the one before it. These stages are referred to as the runners, the stalkers, and the clickers, and those who progress through them may eventually become bloaters or shamblers. In one of the more horrifying sections of The Last of Us Part 2, players are introduced to a new, terrifying creature known as the Rat King. However, for the most part, the infected remained the same as they were in the first game. To our great relief, none of these infectious forms involve flight, at least not for the time being. Following that, how has The Last of Us journey been? Since the release of the first game in the series, the franchise has grown in several unanticipated ways. The original game was upgraded to the PlayStation 4 and got downloadable content with a new story that provided more information about Ellie's past. The second installment of the series, titled The Last of Us Part 2, was released in 2020 and pushed the game in several unexpected and divisive new directions. Before it was decided to convert the plot into an HBO series, a movie version of the original game was also in the works at the same time. The Last of Us, an HBO series, is expected to premiere in 2023. Fans can expect to see more flying opponents and other types of bugs until it becomes clear what path video games will take in the future. Moreover, until that time comes, they should be surprised to see more of these kinds of adversaries. Up next, does Last of Us multiplayer game have world events? Let's see. Following the popularity of The Last of Us Part 2, there is huge anticipation for The Last of Us standalone multiplayer game. Gamers hope Naughty Dog can work magic again and give an outstanding gaming experience. One way the studio may accomplish this is by drawing influence from The Last of Us Part 2, which featured some of the series' strongest enemy confrontations. The monstrous beast, known as the Rat King in particular, would be ideal for a multiplayer environment. The Last of Us gained enormous popularity due to its poignant story of grief and love, as it followed Joel and Ellie's trek across America's dystopian urban sprawls. It was also popular for The Last of Us Factions, a multiplayer mode. When The Last of Us Part 2 was announced, many assumed it would have a multiplayer mode. While it has yet to be revealed, Naughty Dog has announced that it is working on a separate multiplayer project that will not be released. Following that, the Rat King in The Last of Us Part 2. The world of The Last of Us is a dystopian setting where a fungal pandemic has turned a large portion of the population into zombie-like monsters that crave flesh. These infected are mostly blind, but their hearing has significantly improved, and they chase their prey without considering whether or not they might be in danger. Runners have just lately been exposed to the fungus, and even though they can't see, the fungus has already started to colonize their brains. The clickers are unable to see and rely only on their hearing. Players should do everything possible to stop these terrifying creatures from getting close to them because they can be dangerously lethal. Stalkers are just as elegant as runners, but they focus more on springing a surprise on their foes. As the infection spreads, some of the infected will mutate into bloaters. These beasts are enormous, and a thick layer of fungus that serves as armor covers their bodies. They also can tear sacs of mycotoxins from their bodies and hurl them at their opponents. The Shambler is a new variety of infected introduced in The Last of Us Part 2. These infected are comparable to the bloaters. However, they are more susceptible to damage from standard bullets because they do not possess the protective fungus. Moving on, more specifics on the Rat King. The Rat King is a special form of the infected that players can encounter in The Last of Us Part 2, which is the second installment of the game. The horrifying creature was discovered in the bowels of a hospital in Seattle. To use a more technical term, it is not a single organism. Instead, it is the product of several infected being held in isolation from one another, which eventually resulted in their coming together to form a monstrosity of unimaginable horror. Confronting the Rat King is simultaneously one of the game's most thrilling and terrifying moments. The premiere is scheduled for January 2023 and will feature A-list actors, including Bella Ramsey, who will play Ellie.